Snapshots, a series by Tom Spoken. Episode 4, Dust, Rebellion, Tumult. The star was bright. Save for the system's sun, it was the only one bright enough to make it through the shallower banks of toxic cloud, ever present in the skies of Casturon. It served as a focal point for Canthira's gaze, on those infrequent nights where she could arise from the depths of the city and make her way cautiously out to the desert. High desert. The term was laughable to her. Through extensive excavation and even more extensive waste dumping, the desert had been brought low, both in stature and grace. Like everything on Casturon, save the booming industries of the planet, the desert was a shadow of its former self. But, far enough from the cities, way beyond the advisable range of her makeshift gravity skiff, Canthira caught occasional glimpses of its true glory. This place, atop a lonely old mountain, provided one such glimpse. The mountain slopes kept its banded colours, multiple hues attributable to the various elements once layered beneath the planet's crust, upturned to face the universe by millennia of tectonic churning. Violet drifted into soft green, into burnt yellows, and eventually to indigo, before arriving at the vast, dusty red of a long-dead river which made up the valley below. The valley stretched out to the plains, and eventually to the city which, from this distance, only appeared to be moderately monstrous in scope. A monster without a name, at least nameless to its denizens. No titles, no identity, a core value of the planetary management. Likely there was a code buried deep within their reporting systems to help assess the relative productivity of each of their abominations on the surface and below. Management's approach seemed to have worked on the broken populace. Even the rebels continued to refer to the city simply as here. Canthira's gaze returned to the star. The visualizer built into her central eye told her it was Pontes, 7 light-years away. 5 planets in its orbit, 1 inhabitable. Therinia. Unknown to Canthira, before her arrival on Casturon, now it occupied every moment of solitude. The planet was a veritable paradise, and Canthira could not help but appreciate the irony. The only visible star holding such a planet in its orbit, while she toiled in the grave that was Casturon. Daydreaming of a heaven made real. Not exactly good operational discipline, Canthira chastised herself. Back to the task at hand. Produced from the listing gravskiff, she began to assemble the multiple components of her deep space array. Poles, wires, sounding boxes and capture funnels. Had signalling even been possible from within the city, Canthira would never have been able to do so. The array was not exactly inconspicuous. Now fully constructed, the array loomed several meters over her, an ungainly giant, seemingly animated from the nearest scrap heap. As she turned a collar joining the central column to a spidery base, lights came to life on a central console. The blue and red of the screen belied the age of the technology and its origins. Military. With the goal being to get the tech right the first time, the cosmetic elements, such as display style, would remain unchanged long after the products of the masses had moved on. Canthira reached behind the console, bringing forth a long, fibrous-looking lead. Compared to the coarse, ferroplastic nature of the rest of the array, it was practically organic in appearance. Inexplicably, this made her more uncomfortable about inserting it into the side of her head. As she positioned the lead alongside her head, smaller tendrils snaked from the end, probing the air with a semblance of sentient action before eventually finding their target. They slid through Canthira's skin as if through air, first one, then hundreds, until it was as if the attachment had always existed. No port, no plug. This technology was built to interface with anyone and anything, though the experience ranged from the uncomfortable to the downright agonizing, dependent on species. Fortuitously, Canthira's kind had the luxurious ability to turn off their pain receptors at will. Besides, on a world where anything above rudimentary tech was violently withheld from the populace, a cerebral loader would be rather conspicuous. Despite the mild disgust at the appearance of the export lead, the actual experience once connected was almost unnoticeable. Canthira almost felt cheated that the act of countless terabytes of data being extracted from her mind was virtually intangible. The average animal mind would only carry a few gigabytes of data in memory for 15 turns. But across that many days and nights, Canthira would capture and retain so much more. Her modifications went far beyond the visualizer. Respiratory adapter, not that there was much fluid to swim in on Casturon, toxin screen, multiple sensory recorders, the thankfully as yet untested corporeal restart system. The list went on, and all gifted by a group from whom she couldn't name a single individual, but she could name the cause: freedom. And they had made good on bestowing that gift to her. No God but liberty. The first words their agents had ever spoken to her, as she was pulled loose from that place she'd never speak of again, and a phrase she'd come to hear over and over in the 15 years since her liberation. A phrase she'd live and die for, all at her own will. The phrase was her reason for being here. Blue was gradually overtaken by red on the display, and a soft click from within the console, the sole sign of a successful transmission. The screen blanked for a moment, before returning to a sea of blue. A lonely red island sat in the middle, or so it appeared to Canthira. She always found her optical system required a reset as the comms lead withdrew from her mind. As her vision distilled to normalcy, the island on the screen became a message. Discord to be expected. Proceed as planned. Canthira balked at the reply. Her 4 digits grasped the retreating comms lead. She was minded to reinsert and demand a live link. Discord to be expected, she muttered, gripping the lead. They weren't here. They couldn't see. She paused. She was reacting, not responding. An operational negative, as her faceless tutor had been keen to remind her. She exhaled and dropped the lead. It continued to retract into the machinery, shrinking like a shorn artery. Despite her restraint at not protesting Command's message, she continued to dwell on the matter as her skiff bumped unsteadily above the sands, back towards the city. Yes, any revolutionary action would have a certain element of discord. A group willing and able to pursue such a cause was going to be made up of individuals with their own thoughts and opinions, and likely the confidence, or sufficient anger or arrogance, to express those thoughts, strongly and at the cost of others if need be. But Canthira did not feel what was happening here was routine, or as routine as anything could be in a paramilitary uprising. In fact, she felt right now that the movement was on the precipice of splitting in two. That would spell death to any hopes of overthrowing the regime which was bleeding this planet dry. It would also likely spell death for anyone fool enough to pursue the course of action originally laid out as her mission plan. Stop. Without thought, Canthira had killed the skiff's engine. She was halfway buried beneath the upturned vessel before conscious thought took over. Sand also expertly distributed across the skiff's belly. Between its immersion and its appearance mimicking the rock common to the region, most people would think it was just ground which had sat undisturbed for decades. Canthira would have to hope the patrol approaching from the city was most people. If not, She was dead, and her plan, original or modified, was irrelevant. The speed of her response was solely thanks to an inbuilt early warning system, another of the organisation's gifts. Though Canthira hated the thought of something taking over her mind and body as it did, the system had detected the bounders when they were mere bumps on the haze of the horizon and had responded accordingly. Her eyes could never have knowingly seen the vessels so early, and at a time where her diminutive skiff would have been invisible in the corresponding haze which would have dominated the bounder's own horizon. As the awful drone of the bounder engines came closer, Canthira quickly checked all elements of the array, ensuring not a single source of active power could be found. In parallel, she switched off her own infrastructure with a thought. It was about to get very hot. The bounders slowed to a hover either side of the skiff, an obvious place to stop, for it was a windless dusk, and this was the only area with any dust floating in the air for miles. The early warning system couldn't solve everything. Great black hulks. The bounders resembled something one wouldn't be surprised to see exploding from the depths of a great ocean on a faraway world, consuming the unsuspecting before retreating into darkness. That was essentially their standard operating procedure here too, thought Canthira. The upturned skiff formed an unintentional sound cave around her, making the thrum of the engines almost unbearable. Sound dampening currently impossible, she resorted to inserting 2 digits each into her oral grooves. It helped somewhat. Onto the deck of one of the bounders emerged a teeming pile of cables and technological ephemera. A Casturon. This was unseen by Canthira, but wholly expected. The Casturon had long offered their services to management across a broad catalogue of technological services. Canthira didn't strictly think of them as evil, but on the rare occasion she had time to debate such moral quandaries, she did wonder if selling your wares to any and all customers, regardless of their intent, was more evil than actively seeking to make misery. Or perhaps it was just less honest. Now wasn't necessarily the time to conclude on this problem. The more immediate issue was how senior this particular Casturon happened to be. It seemed to be the standard amongst their kind that the more senior the individual, the more finely tuned and esoteric their technology. This Casturon's rank could be the difference between its ability to detect the electric pulses generated by her internal tech, now dormant, and an ability to detect the bioelectric pulses generated by virtually any living thing in the universe. In the case of the latter, she was already dead. The Casturon stood motionless aboard the bounder. Gradually, it lifted what could arguably be described as arms, tumbling, entwined masses of cables. From the ends of these appendages sprouted various devices, scanning for a multitude of things many would not know of nor understand. In simple terms, signs that someone unexpected was, or is, in the vicinity. After several minutes had passed, the devices snapped back into the appendages from whence they came, and the Casturon turned on the spot, seemingly frustrated. The officer leading the squad of management enforcement troops on the bounder approached. Their exchange was inaudible to Canthira over the throb of the bounder engines, but she expected the Casturon was informing the officer that the findings were inconclusive. No active signs of life or technology were found, but energy signature suggested something had been here recently. Maybe. What happened next depended on just how committed to their job this officer happened to be. Very was the answer. The bounder engines cut to their minimum position, relief to Canthira's hearing. This was quickly followed by feet making landfall all around the two vessels. From the faint thuds Canthira could pick up, the sand serving to amplify, the entirety of both Bounder's squads had deployed to search the area. Now she was in trouble. The soldiers back and forth, as they called back confirmations for each segment they searched, held a rhythm that belied their training and discipline. They were also getting closer. Canthira cooked beneath the skiff, unable to do anything but wait and see if she would be discovered. A foot thudded against the edge of the hollow skiff. So, she thought, today she would die. Several things happened at the same time. A blinding flash of light as the skiff was heaved up, and the still strong light of dusk assaulted Canthira's eyes. A shuffling as Canthira produced a very analogue, yet brutally effective, solid round combustion weapon from her poncho, aiming at the blinding light. Her third eye recovered sight almost immediately, thanks to the inherent shading the ocular display unit had layered across her natural lens. This revealed two soldiers, uniforms of grey and black, masks of anonymity, sweeping elliptical visual intakes sitting either side of a cruel-looking Vox and air filtration unit. Lastly, but thankfully in concurrence with all of the other sensory revelations, and as Canthira's 4-digit tightened on the triggering lever of her weapon, a hand. Preferred from the shorter of the two soldiers, not in aggression, not in surprise, but in the almost universal sign of caution. Wait, the hand said, and for some unknown reason, Canthira complied. Skiff, the taller of the two called out to the other, the shorter's hand remaining in place. Checking for traps, Taller continued. This would keep the rest of the squads at bay, Canthira thought. The taller of the two eventually reached down into the hollow beneath the skiff. Canthira flinched, almost shooting on instinct, but an emphatic shake of the shorter's upheld hand made her pause once more. As she did, the taller grasped what he could of the array in one hand and raised it high above his head. Comms kit. Looks military, before tossing it back to the ground. The shorter of the two chimed in. Ground is warm, recently disturbed, she said, all authority. They've hidden this and fled. We need to expand our search. The taller leaned down once more. Canthira resisted the urge to flinch as he made a show of fiddling with some imaginary component of the skiff. Engine shuttered. Mine set, he called out. If they make it back here, they're not making it any further. As quickly as things had erupted for Canthira, the skiff dropped down over her once more. The troops could be heard shouting orders as feet thudded back towards the Bounders. Then it was nothing but the overwhelming roar of the engines as they ripped away to their pursuit of the imaginary. Canthira lay there in the dark, unthinking, unmoving, in shock. After an hour, she reactivated her infrastructure and turned to do the same with aspects of the comms array before realizing it was broken. The taller hadn't taken much care when tossing it back to the ground. A small price to pay for whatever had just happened, she supposed. As she once more adjusted her enhanced eyes to the dark, she spotted something half buried in the sand. It was a note. She unfolded it carefully, as if expecting the aforementioned mine the soldier had supposedly left to be buried within the creased material. Go south next time. They know this route. Canthira exhaled forcefully. Half relief, half frustration at being so confused. What was going on? The remainder of the journey back into the city somehow passed without event. The Bounders clearly taken aback via a wide sweep so as to avoid her path, courtesy of the unknown saviours. Canthira ditched the skiff in her usual hideaway. She knew it would need to be moved, but required time to scope out a new location. She also needed to fix her deep space array, but that would have to wait too. Right now, she was late to a meeting, and it would be a less than accommodating route to get there. Dust. This was the biggest challenge. With the industries pulling almost all water from the surface and much of that which existed below, the entirety of the planet had become what Canthira had just journeyed across to deliver her message to Overwatch. Aside from the cataclysmic dust storms this generated across the barren landscape, travelling through this terrain wasn't too problematic. Once the dust reached the cities, this was where the real problems began. In the swirling heights of management domiciliaries, not a speck was left. From there on down, it was a lesson in the direct correlation between need of public services and intentional lack of provision. In the underbelly of the city, dust became mountain ranges. In places, it even had tidal patterns, albeit unpredictable, as on any one day, the circulatory gates which drove the dust tides may just choose not to open. On others, they may never close, leaving any soul unfortunate enough to be down there at the mercy of a constantly shifting mass in the millions of tons. When elements of the city's inner workings failed, they were proven to be critical to management priorities. Only then would efforts be taken to remove the dust. Even then, it was like a drop in the non-existent oceans. After a long, arduous trudge through the undercarriage of the city, Canthira emerged into a clearing among the pipework and sewerage that kept the settlement from descending completely into pestilence and fecundity. The smell was testament to the effort it was making. Clearing may not have been the right word, she thought, looking up at the light filtering down from street level hundreds of meters above. It was more like being at the bottom of a well, forgotten by the world at large. She had plenty of company down there, though. Rank upon rank of the disgruntled, the dishevelled, and the downright dangerous. The leaders of the city's rebel contingent gathered to assess progress and plan for the future. A future Canthira felt was uncertain. She graces us with her presence. Finally. The words, with poorly hidden disdain, came from Ansh, someone who would be belligerent, even if born on a sanctuary world. His leadership came about by virtue of his voice being so loud as to drown out all challengers from his caste, the Foundrymen, beaters, as they were better known. And accounting for his imperfect leadership, Canthira would grant this: he could fight. She did not respond to Ansh's challenge, nor acknowledge his glare as she entered the central circle, weaving through a mass of musty cloaks, home-crafted weaponry, and dark eyes set back in the even darker depths of 1,000 hoods. She had no need to respond. For one, she knew to acknowledge was to encourage with Ansh, and for two, shut up, you miserable bastard. You and I both know she'd never fail us. For two, she knew that Haddon would respond. His claws retracting beneath a natural carapace that topped his paw and forearm, he held it across his face briefly in the traditional greeting of his own kind. Haddon's people were not of this world. Their sleek, dark fur and big, bright eyes meant for some distant, unending jungle. But they'd spun the wheel with management and lost, and so they were here now, those that were left. The sadness that told this story swam in Haddon's eyes, beneath the genuine warmth meant for the new arrival. Canthira, he trilled, as he lowered his arm, a panoply of blades tinkling beneath his cloak as he did so. Though markedly different to Ansh, she'd grant the same of Haddon. He could fight too. Ansh had looked ready to retort at Haddon's insult, so Canthira was quick to interject. "We have a problem," she said. "We have multiple," Haddon replied, "but I'd worry we were failing in our mission should life be a paradise." "Agreed," huffed Ansh. "A new problem," Canthira continued, raising her voice so that the crowd might hear. "Returning to the city from delivering a report to Overwatch, I was almost caught by management troops." Murmuring stirred among the crowd. It appeared that they were expecting my presence. Murmurs became a rabble of overlapping voices. Canthira felt guilty at limiting the truth she gave to the rebels, but until she herself could understand why those soldiers did what they did, it could do nothing but harm to share those details with an already fractious group. "Silence!" Ansh roared, his volume ample to cut over the hundreds of voices. Quiet indeed reigned for a few moments. "What does this mean for the plan, Canthira?" Haddon spoke softly. Before she could answer, Ansh was ranting. "It means nothing for the plan. If anything, it means we bloody speed up." Assent came from several corners, various leaders of varied castes, from what Canthira could see. Even the accountants appeared to have reached the point of impatience. "It means," Canthira spoke again, her voice soft but powerful, calming the mutterers. "It means we may have an informant, which means our plan may be compromised." "Not if we change the timeline," Ansh objected. "A day early could still be a damn sight short if management know the exact details of our approach," Canthira replied, Ansh huffing with scorn and turning away. "I fear we are too far along," Haddon said. "We may have no choice but to move now, before someone is caught." Canthira looked to Haddon, surprised to hear him side with Ansh on anything. She could see the base logic in what he had said, but felt he was overlooking the broader context and flaws this brought, in a way she would not normally expect from the patient, measured man. "And," he continued, "with our strike points spread across the city, we reduce the risk of being wiped out. They cannot spread themselves to address us all." Canthira closed her eyes. She knew that was coming. "No, no, no," Ansh roared. "How many damn times? We separate and we die." Haddon looked ready for rebuttal, but was bulldozed by Ansh's continued verbal onslaught. "I was there when we struck for more food. I saw what happens when you split up. I know it doesn't work, and I know this city." Spit flew from his mouth as he raged. Beneath the anger, Canthira could sense the hurt as Ansh recalled a painful lesson of the past. "We're one force. We overwhelm. We take the management hall. We hang the scum in the square. The troops will surrender when they see their pockets about to run dry. Besides, they're not worth the ammunition when we can leave them to the desert. See if their masters will come to collect them when they realize they've failed." Haddon sighed, looking once more to Canthira. "Do we even have a plan if we cannot agree on something as crucial as this?" She was about to answer before she leapt for Haddon and tackled him to the floor. Weapons ridged out from her back, launching multiple needling projectiles into the dark. Snapping back into herself, her conscious brain now caught up. She kept Haddon down as her enhancements launched another volley. Projectiles were quickly returned from the dark and snatched away several of the rebel host forever. Erased in flashes of rusted red and violet, they had been discovered. The clearing became chaos. "Up! Up!" Hands big and brutal snatched Canthira and Haddon from the floor as if they were nothing. Ansh set the pair either side of him before dismissing 3 management soldiers who had revealed themselves from the shadows with a single sweep of his arm. They ended their journey through the air some 15 meters from where Ansh had made his stand. in a partly dismembered pile. Canthira and Haddon were quick to shift around Ansh's shifting hulk as he thundered back towards his fellow beaters. "Rally, you morons! Don't waste a shot!" Meanwhile, Eyes for the Jungle worked alongside eyes tailored for any occasion, Haddon and Canthira making quick work of the soldiers who foolishly believed the darkness beyond the clearing was sufficient cover. Canthira's primitive combustion weapon and seemingly endless implants working in harmony with Haddon's vicious throwing blades. Quickly accepting safety in shadows was lost to them, the management soldiers swarmed the clearing en masse. This seemed to be an eventuality they had already planned for, Canthira thought, as she saw the first of the soldiers to be fully kitted out in breacher suits. Usually reserved for combat in orbital battles, where pressure and atmospheric levels could vary wildly, and there was not an impossible chance one might get sucked into the void. Their presence here clearly showed the troops had known who they were being sent to fight. Several of the breachers immediately peeled off towards Ansh, sensible to Canthira's mind. The rest came down on them in a wave of grey and black. Canthira did not need to tell the mass of rebels to hold. She knew they would be there to the death. So she made herself as useful as possible, diving deep behind the front line and set about dealing death to the unsuspecting, huddled deep within the ranks of the management force. Haddon did likewise. They slashed, they ducked, they weaved and leapt, from target to target, gone before the soldier beside those lost could even respond. As the final shrieks of the slain dotted about the clearing, the effect was exactly as desired. The management troops lost focus, spinning to and fro, seeking the cause of the death-dealing. It drew focus from the press forward, leaving the rebels less than crushed. Soon, the crush was on the management force, troops failing beneath the boots of their own, and as they piled, leaving little room for further retreat. Canthira couldn't help but feel such fighting felt primitive, but in their current surroundings, unsanitary, indecent, and inhumane as they were, it was appropriate. And so the melee continued until the buzzing began. The rebels became distracted in their rebuttal of the management forces. They knew what the noise held for them and searched desperately for the source, eyes snapping all around. Then the first monitor struck. The bane of many a wayward citizen, doing anything but being productive for management being the benchmark for wayward. The monitors were a waking nightmare. An amalgam of tech and reclaimed parts from livestock processing. They came in many a form, but they all strove towards the same goal, the death of whatever was in front of them. A swarm descended on the rebels at the first to strike, carried its victim up and away into the darkness, yelps of fear trailing behind. The others were quick to follow suit, semi-functioning jaws and claws clamping onto limbs and necks, repurposed industrial devices bursting flesh and scale and carapace wide open. The glorious spectrum of the rebel force being laid waste by a hovering host of terror. As the rebels struggled to contend with this new threat, many began to flee. Management troops were quick to pick off these unfortunates, having retreated once more to the edges of the clearing, forming a corral. The rebels were playing the role of the herd too well, Canthira thought. "We're going to lose everyone if we don't get out of here," she yelled to Haddon, once more by her side, soaked in blood and viscera. He nodded in grim accord. "We're lost and we're bloody leaving," Ansh added, needlessly barging in behind them. He was carrying two very dead soldiers who appeared to be serving as clubs. "Follow me." Then he was off at the line, ducking plasma rounds deftly for one his size. He opened a line some 10 troops wide with a sweep of his makeshift weapons, one finally giving out as he did so, the top half of the lifeless soldier following his comrades into the distance on the same trajectory. His gains were not, however, without cost. As he barged through a tunnel beyond the clearing, 2 of the surviving breachers sank grappling staffs deep into his back. Ansh roared in pain, but continued his drive to freedom. Time could not be spared to free Ansh of such suffering just yet. Canthira could only dispatch the owners of the hooks with carefully placed shots through the limited weak spots in their armour. They seemed not to realise they were dead for several steps, before slowly sliding down the shafts of their weapons and settling in the teeming gutters as the rebel trio carried on into the darkness, scatterings of additional rebels not far behind. They halted several miles from the meeting site, sounds of pursuit having ceased for some time since. The surviving beaters were tending to Ansh's back, while Haddon and Canthira did what they could for the few who had made it this far, quite scathed. Several required mercy, which Canthira was quick to provide and amply stocked to do so. Preparing for such eventualities may seem callous to some, like the wider force were dispensable. The reality was, Canthira had seen this play out on enough worlds now to know it was going to happen. It was going to happen a lot, and it was a lot worse if you weren't equipped to do anything about it. Her tone and touch were gentle, almost reverent as she ministered to the unlucky. She said the prayers where she knew them, offered comfort where she did not, and offered nothing to those committed to the void. Their kind had accepted the end from birth. When all was said and done, Canthira and Haddon trudged across to Ansh. He was leaning, listing even given his mass. Ansh never leaned. He was in a bad way. "Don't start, I'm fine," he rumbled, seemingly having developed mind-reading abilities during his charge down the tunnels to safety. Canthira nodded. "We have an informer." Haddon spoke the words everyone was thinking, but the boiling anger the suggestion stoked in the surviving group could still be felt in the air. "Well, they weren't there tonight," Ansh barked, "because they've just butchered the scum." "No prisoners," said Canthira quietly, all eyes shifting to her. "What?" said Haddon. "They weren't there to take prisoners," she continued. "That means whoever they found, whoever came to them, they gave them everything. They don't need to know any more now. They just need to stamp it out." "Nonsense," Ansh scoffed loudly. "They couldn't have given them the whole thing because no one knows the whole bloody thing." "Someone does," Canthira replied, her tone ending the conversation. "I need to reach Overwatch. If they have anything, I will return with it by dusk tomorrow. Until then, stay hidden." As she slunk off deeper into the city's guts, she slid aside her robe once she was sure the others had lost sight. The gash was deep. That's going to need sorting, she thought, before wincing on to her next destination. Canthira laid on the trash pack roof, resting her head on her rolled-up face covering for support. She had the pads of her right hand laid flat across the gash, the implants within seeping corrective gel into the wound. She couldn't turn her pain receptors off for this one. She needed to feel for the telltale searing burn that would indicate the gel making it inside a compromised organ. So far, so good. It was just a smouldering burn. Steam rose from the wound, from the heat generated by the nanites within the gel hard at work. Cooked back to good health, Canthira mused. She turned her head towards the one gap between towering habitation units to see the dark of the sky. There it was again. Pontes. She could calculate the infinitesimally small odds of having secured accommodation in the one home with a direct line of sight to the star with which she had become obsessed, but she didn't. Infinitesimally small would suffice. She made no effort to stop her visualizer from bringing up the system summary for the 1000th time, and instead began to read through the now familiar history. Her subconscious systems detected movement as she read on, deeming the motion to be safe quite quickly. Daedra. Canthira played the fool and pretended not to notice the child creeping closer on her 6 limbs. Her palm had completed its work as the child reached her, and Canthira spun onto her side, as if unbroken all along. "Got you," she cried, grasping Daedra by her forelimbs. The child chittered between her mandibles, before grappling Canthira onto her back, the woman clearly feigning weakness. "You nearly didn't see me this time," Daedra giggled. "Almost. Keep practicing," Canthira laughed encouragingly. "So, what did you do today?" Canthira continued, as the child nestled into her side. "You stayed off the main streets, right?" "Yes," sighed Daedra. "It's so boring being in the house all day. I've read every single book 1,000,000 times over." "Well," Canthira replied, "you can never read a book too many times." "I guess," the child conceded doubtfully. "Tell me again about the deposit." "Ugh," Canthira feigned impatience. "If I have to." "Yes, yes, yes." Daedra's mandibles clacked in excitement. Excitement only a child could have at hearing a story which by this stage must be as familiar as the scales across her thorax. "Out there," Canthira pointed to the sky, "there's a tool called the deposit, and it contains all the knowledge in the universe. Well," Canthira qualified, "almost all. There are still some secrets out there after all." Daedra always quivered with glee at that part. Canthira continued. "The deposit is there for everyone, and they use it to find out the answers to questions every day. The answers aren't always right, but the deposit gives them the choice to go and check the answers before they do anything with them. And some people do, and some people don't," Daedra chorused, as if the story were a song of joy. "Exactly," Canthira said. "In fact, most people don't," she thought, as she carried on. "The deposit is maintained and grown every day, and on every topic you could ever imagine. No matter how many people care about the subject or how few, you will always find something, somewhere, about whatever it may be. Communities exist on the deposit. They argue and they laugh and they cry and they inform. And they misinform too, but they usually get found out." Canthira lied a little on that last part. Poetic license, she felt. "And one day, when management are gone, we'll have the deposit too," Daedra said in a determined tone. The deviation from their usual bedtime story caught Canthira off guard. "Where did you hear that, Daedra?" The tone shifted. The other children in the street," Daedra replied hesitantly. "But it was only the small street, not the main one." "Daedra." Canthira looked the child squarely in the eyes, her voice calm but firm. "You must never say that to anyone but me. Ever. Do you understand?" The child hesitated. "Do you understand, Daedra?" "Yes, Maestra," Daedra replied. "I won't ever tell anyone about it, ever." Canthira relaxed a little and pulled the child closer. "But I should still keep practicing my sneaking so I'm ready, right, Maestra?" Canthira said nothing and held the child tight. Canthira had almost fallen asleep, and Daedra was fully gone when her parents came to find her. Gasrat, her father, scooped the child into his forearms and scuttled her away to bed. Manrock, her mother, remained. Her mandibles tasted the air. "You've healed tonight," her tone one of a disapproving mother. That was what she was, after all. Canthira did not answer, as they both knew there was no point in her trying to hide it, nor explain. Manrock, however, did feel the need to express the feelings Canthira was all too aware she felt. "I do not want this to come to my door, Maestra." Her pitch always shifted on the name, as if she knew she was being lied to. Not that much else Canthira told her was the truth, but she always seemed affronted at the unacknowledged false name. "It won't," Canthira insisted, rising from her reclined position, "and once it does, it will already be over." Manrock looked ready to challenge further. Canthira remedied this with hands upon her face. I promise this, Pride of the Nest. For now, I need to deliver a message to someone. Canthira dropped from the roof into the street below before the conversation could go on. The factory sprawled like a fungal infection, spanning 30 blocks across and 70 or more in length. As greater need for production manifested, homes were co-opted or razed to make space. Most belonged to workers whose options were live at your station or find comfort in the street. These expansions were regular, bloody, and their outcomes depressingly predictable. More lost sons and daughters of the city, less food allocations in reprisal, maximised margins for another month. Finding her contact would be challenging in such a vast place, especially having to remain hidden from the management patrols watching over the workforce. While Canthira remained concealed behind power banks, over gas extractor lines and through air ducts, she saw everyone and everything as she passed through the factory complex. Safe to say, it wasn't a pretty sight. For every level of the facility Canthira cleared, there would be some accident, some exhausted worker collapse, some indignity forced upon the indentured labourers by management soldiery. As she made her way through yet another floor, the hum of production was cut through with a brief scream of agony. Her enhanced audio-visual cooperation meant she was easily able to locate the source, despite the sea of bodies and machinery before her. A young Evution had lost several tentacles to the machine at their station. Unsurprisingly, adaptation of machinery to the anatomy of the user was not high in management's priorities, and so accidents such as this were depressingly predictable. Less predictable was the lack of response from those around them, making the seconds passing by feel like hours as the unfortunate rolled on the floor in dire pain. Eventually, management troops sidled over, seemingly bored by the development. The subsequent interaction, though unheard by Canthira, was obvious. Fellow Evutions, alongside the incapacitant, were ordered off their stations to take their compatriot away. Again, reluctance followed before resigned action. The explanation for such alien behaviour could be seen in the now visible control panels at their empty stations. Numbers, having risen endlessly since the shift began, now ticking downwards and at a rapid pace. It was not long before the screens were flashing warning signs. These workers were in debt for the day. Even the station of the injured, having paused for the mandatory 2 minutes upon detection of an injury, had resumed its descending count. There would be many families going hungry tonight, thought Canthira. Worse, perhaps only one family. The workers ordered to assist were likely related to the injured one. She could dwell no more on such things, for her unconscious mind had found her target, the commsman. He cast a spectre as he loomed down the narrow corridor between extractor units. Of all the workers in the facility, he was among a chosen few that would not be questioned for being here. The communications network between departments within the factory, across factory floors, even between different factory complexes, was critical to maintaining productivity, but crude and very much makeshift in its construction. It had developed chaotically and in a very much reactive fashion, responding to the usually late notice of factory expansions. The primitive end product meant it was not something the Casturon would deign to touch. Management had nearly caused a diplomatic incident when they had dared to ask. Management also did not bother with it directly themselves. Call it accurate or arrogant, they felt any technology that basic could not present a meaningful threat to them, and they could just listen in when the mood took them. The solution was a class of workers expected to gift themselves the know-how to maintain the network, founded from those too weak or too crippled to undertake the work of the masses. The commsman was one who had not just survived but excelled in this role. The technology and its unending gifts, as he called them, unexpected and inconvenient malfunctions to others, were a distraction from the agony that was his life on Casturon. The commsman's towering, unstable frame was a consequence of birth on a planet with a far lighter gravitational load than most capable of sustaining intelligent life. Casturon's gravity was roughly 3 times that of his home. He'd never been meant for here. Trading on a passing raft world, he was unlucky enough to still be on board when disaster struck. Management had the only vessels which seemed willing to accept the surplus of evacuees, and with decompression racing towards them, none had thought to ask the destination. The journey seemed instantaneous for one unfamiliar with traversing the void, and so the commsman's confusion and horror was understandable when he finally found a porthole to see the planet before him was not his own, but Casturon. The debt he had unknowingly incurred for management's merciful rescue meant 30 years of service. Braces that weren't worth a damn to hold up his frame in the hellish gravity, another 5. The inevitable pain medication he would need to survive every waking hour. Well, that could be discussed on the ground, of course. These were not the end of his debts naturally. A planet such as Casturon would always find further ways to tax the mind and body, and the commsman's story was familiar to the point of mundanity for the populace. Some were understanding, kind even, on his arrival. Most could not afford such luxuries, and he was quick to fit into this mould. The miracle of being granted the communications job had been life-altering, that was true, but in the sense that he had gone from not wanting to live any more to at least considering the possibility that living may work out over the course of another decade. So it hadn't exactly done much for his mindset. Canthira knew this going into the interaction, and so she would have to tread carefully. As the commsman rounded another bend in the maze of machinery, Canthira judged this was far enough from the main floor to advertise her presence. She stepped out from the pitch black of the mechanisms into the half-light of the walkway. The commsman stopped, his face unmoving, which suggested he was not surprised to see her. She proffered the container of pain blockers before speaking, best to make clear early that his payment was more than the gratitude of the movement. His long, slender claws reached out and took them slowly. The tremors suggested he had been running low again. This could swing the conversation either way, Canthira thought. The commsman spoke first. "I take it word of last night's developments are true, then?" Canthira looked to her right to indicate yes. "Then I am sorry for your losses." The words carried little by way of feeling. "I need to get word to Overwatch," Canthira said, opting to get straight to the point. Naturally. This wasn't going to be easy, she thought. "I need to do so without leaving the city." Silence. Canthira maintained her patience. "I need the burster." "Well, I am required to be here for another 14 hours. I can't just..." Excuses. I don't have time for excuses, Canthira thought. "The agreement was for you to keep the burster in your possession at all times, in exchange for appropriate remuneration," she said. "At all times, meaning that upon my unexpected appearance, let's say today, I would ask and you would present the burster to me, in full and functioning order." He looked as if he were about to speak, and so she pushed on, "at which point you would further be appropriately remunerated." She produced a vial of anti-inflammatory, much harder to obtain. Beat and then sweet, she thought to herself. The commsman sighed and produced the burster in one hand, while snatching the additional payment of drugs with another. "I can't guarantee it'll work," he blurted. These things are very temperamental, and it wasn't given to me in the best condition to begin with, he said accusingly. Though I did what I could, he added, remembering the payment could quite easily be retracted, and he could be relieved of his worldly agonies in other ways. Canthira had never suggested this to him. She'd never needed to. As she moved to retreat into the darkness once more, the commsman spoke again hesitantly. There are only 4 places that will work in the bounds of the city. They're quite a climb and most quite far. There seemed to be a question somewhere in his words. Canthira did not provide the answer. The streets were no different than any other day as she made her way through the crowds, though they felt fraught with danger now she had the burster in her possession. That was the thing most people did not understand about cover work. They believed some distinct class of creature existed, impervious to fear and immune to stress, who were somehow born into the mould of the covert, and went about their day as one might go to the market. Not true. It was the ordinary, who by coercion or conviction jumped into the unknown and hoped there was ground somewhere down there, but not too far. And as such, every waking hour carried some degree of fear of discovery. In this waking hour, the fear was particularly high for Canthira. One misstep, one beater not watching where they were going, and the burster was scattered across the floor for all to witness, including the management soldiers. Though there had been no increase in patrols that she could see, every second face seemed to be theirs. Still, she pressed on through the streets far further than she needed, to the steeple point 3rd furthest from her rendezvous with the commsman. She hadn't liked his questioning at the end, and though it was a mere stiffness in her neck, she felt the closest and the furthest were the prime choices to which an informant might direct a patrol to intercept. The base was free from prying eyes, which made sense given the cancers and mutations caused by the steeple emissions. But space was at a premium in Casturon, and so her initial climb was sheltered from view by a mass of storage units. Storage for the most infrequently needed of goods, naturally. As she rose above the final warehouse roofs, her cloak responded to a combination of her desire and the increase in light, mirroring the steeple sides in colour and texture in an instant. Enough for now, she thought. The walls were without purchase, and her metabolism was in overdrive to produce adhesive through her healing palms. It was quick to evaporate, so luckily she would not leave much of a trail, but it was nothing a Casturon with a wish to discover could not find, so she needed to be quick. The steeple had a negligent rim near its point, enough for anyone with doctored grip to use as a stable base, a quick way to visit the ground for anyone of natural anatomy. Canthira clung to it like she was without aid nonetheless. With her spare hand, she clasped the burster and clamped it to her face. The connection was instant and far more uncomfortable than her still defunct array. Risk ratings flashed at her from the display which had forced with her inbuilt support system, telling her things of which she was already painfully aware. This was a terrible, desperate act. So was betrayal. Deliver message. Limited window forecast. Canthira thought she would need to do this manually, so she thought out the words. Ambush, W, leadership, suspect, leak, stop, confirm, question. The wait was like a lifetime as she clung to the steeple for 10 seconds. Between the climb and the conversation, she'd earned a restless evening of carcino clearance from her system. Confirmed. Possible multiples. Factions unknown. Canthira felt rage, not mere frustration as she had in the desert peaks. How could this not have been conveyed then? Overwatch response continued as if clairvoyant. She had her suspicions at that. New information. Casturon sweeps delayed delivery. Other assets lost in delivery stop. Other assets Canthira knew she would never be told of, but she also knew this had been explicitly flagged as a one-head mission. She should have at least been told presence of others was likely. Rage once more, but the messages continued, this time unexpected. Exit, command, stop, validation, void over, victory, end validation. Further asset loss value greater than cause, stop. Canthira's rage spilled over, Daedra burning through her vision. She was about to reply when the burster shut down. They were incapable of fault. They shut down at interference. As this had happened, Canthira's body had secreted her between coolant pipes there to service the steeple beacon. Its energy consumption was astounding. The cause of the illnesses generated by the device and a very real source of uncontrollable fires should the coolant system fail. Her eyes once more under her own control, she saw the bounder hover past, mere feet away. She locked eyes with troopers whose own did not lock back, her camouflage enough to start with. In the depths of the bounder, though, she could see piles of cabling. Camouflage alone would not get her through the day. The Casturon clung to the door runners, its sensors creeping from the circling vessel into the scant space between them and the steeple. The disruption from the steeple itself made several sensors recoil in a facsimile of terror. They could not stand being so close to such distortion. This was good. Few remained hovering before their owner, and to Canthira's eyes they would prove a serious problem. Heat sensors. In the wash of the steeple's heat, she was going to stick out like an ice block. The only answer was an overheat, for which her body was quick to service. Organs were rallied, glands shut off entirely. Fluids were pushed as fast as they could be, more friction for the fire. Beneath her cloak, she could feel her skin begin to blister. The Casturon looked on, lifeless ocular intakes converting the feed from its outreach sensors. To Canthira's rapidly failing eyes, it felt like she was seen and could not be unseen. Heat continued to rise, organs cooked, vessels began to rupture. Discovery would be irrelevant soon, and nor would she care. The heat sensors slunk beneath the Casturon's cloak, and the bounder pulled away. As it dipped between the buildings, Canthira's body began to reset. This rush of air will cool me, she thought, as her steaming form slipped from the steeple. Her cloak flashing different disguises as she fell. She span in the air, and almost thought she saw Pontes before the spin pulled her around to face the earth below. Canthira's last thought was how lucky that the other steeples were so far from here. The bounders currently circling them would not see her as she dropped. It's not possible to shut off your nervous system when you're unconscious, even harder when you are half cooked. So the awakening Canthira received was quite possibly the most painful she had ever experienced. It was hard to tell if the bones snapping back into their rightful positions was worse, or the itching, creeping sting of the receding blisters which covered every organ, every skin cell, every entrail. The mist in her agonized mind fell back to the rhythm of the blisters healing from her eyes, and she began to account for her circumstances. For all the gifts bestowed upon her, even Canthira could not recover from what she had just endured. Not alone, that is. Her head snapped up to witness her saviours. Saviours. There were two of them. Shorter and taller stood at her feet, watching her resurrection with casual interest. Despite the anonymity of their outfits, she could tell it was the same troopers from the desert. She rolled to her side, spat out a mass of discharge from the now healed blistering, and rose to her feet. The three stood facing each other in tense silence. When it became clear they were not going to speak, Canthira pulled her cloak about her and readied her enfeebled frame to leave. She paused before departing, the troopers blankly looking on. I'm glad it wasn't you they discovered, she said, thinking back to Overwatch's communique. The taller did not respond. The shorter tilted their head to one side like a quizzical avian on many a forest world. Silence reigned at the foot of the steeple. Canthira went to open her mouth once more, reconsidered, and departed, shaking her head. Like a broken data feed, her mind returned to the same thought as the desert. What had just happened? The return to the underworld of Casturon was harder than it had been yesterday. Her body felt weaker than she had known since the childhood she'd rather forget. Many of the most frequently used elements of her support framework were yet to come back online. The mountains of dust felt ever more grueling as a result. She collapsed down many, having expended all energy to reach their summits, forced to slump her way to the bottom. By the time she made it to the previously established beta rendezvous, Alpha was no longer an option after last night. She was greeted by a far greater number than she had anticipated, and far greater weaponry too. This was not a good sign. Though the crowds should have proved impassable, they parted like river reeds for Canthira. It was as if these countless strangers had known her since birth, knew exactly where she needed to go, and could do nothing but ease her onward journey. Her fragile condition very apparent, several handed over water, ration packs, or agit, the ubiquitous, chewable numbing root, as she passed. She took them without question and without pause. She needed to find the leaders. In spite of the ease of passage, this still took almost an hour. She was astounded so many people could fit in this place. She was less impressed at the prospect of what might soon befall them. Haddon! Ansh! Canthira's call exclamatory, but her voice a shadow of its usual self. This was enough to draw their attention immediately. They appeared horrified at the volume of bodily fluid decorating her cloak, and equally confused at how she was still walking were these fluids her own, or, alternatively, not being hotly pursued by the friends and allies of those who had contributed to said decoration if they weren't her own. What? Haddon began, but a hand from Canthira silenced him. A fall, she stated. It was nothing. It was definitely something, she thought, flashes of the rapidly approaching ground in her mind. Good, Ansh bellowed, typically heedless to the proximity of those he was addressing. Now you've fell your way down here, we can get started. A chart of the city lay before him, the markers she could make out confirming what Canthira had already feared upon sight of the crowds. You're attacking now? She asked, already knowing the answer. We've got the bodies, Ansh claimed boldly. After last night, we're not like to get any more, he continued, slightly less assured of himself before recovering his bluster. So we better bloody get at it. Haddon? Canthira looked at him pleadingly. The soft, scarred face of her now friend looked back in sad resignation. Ansh is right, Canthira. After last night, we cannot wait. Whatever they know, and with every hour, they can only know more. Ansh had returned to strategizing with his fellow beaters as Haddon spoke. But what do you not know? Canthira implored, striding to the edge of the table on which they planned. There's one informant confirmed. Overwatch says there's more currently unknown. Confirmed, Ansh spat. Who's bloody confirmed? The commsman, Canthira stated. By me. The revelation bought a few seconds of silence, which rippled its way several layers back into the crowd. Haddon appeared heartbroken at the betrayal. Ansh uncharacteristically hesitant. He was all too aware of the 1,000 eyes upon him now. This awareness was not from a place of cowardice, Canthira knew, but from a place of genuine, aggressive care for his people. But, as with anyone of such bullish nature, his only recourse to the danger was through. His mind was unchanged. To hell with that spindle, I'll find him after. The bravado emanated into the crowd palpably. And to the others? To the unknown? To the void with them, Ansh roared. No anger at Canthira, but to the centuries of injustice inflicted upon this place and those that dwelt within it. We fight. We kill as many of them as we bloody can, and if we fail, so be it. It only makes it harder for them when our children come with knives to their doors. Such a statement may shake the nerves of many, but not the denizens of here. Loss had served only to embolden them in the face of greater loss. There was a murmur of powerful assent from the crowd. Ansh, please, Canthira began, before being cut short once more as the brave beast rose from the table. Enough, he said. Rebels, you'll need no words from me. You know your jobs and you know your place, and if you don't by now, then Void help you. This drew laughs from the crowd. So, he said, get to it. In an instant, the underbelly began to clear, shouting of orders and cries for support where the scant vehicles they had refused to start, but above all that noise, the thundering of thousands of feet, hooves, slapping tentacles and grating claws as they made their charge to the surface and attempted freedom. Well, said Ansh over the rumble, shouldn't you be gone? I doubt the plight of the oppressed ends at the edge of our bloody atmosphere. There was no insult to his words. Canthira knew Ansh understood she must go, for orders, if not her own desire. She also knew he would not stand to see her stay and would have her forcibly removed from the city if needed. There was much else she knew that the giant in body and spirit could never say. Survive, she said, the pain in her voice unrelated to the earlier fall. Ansh nodded and was gone. Canthira turned to Haddon. Trust no one but Ansh, she pleaded. I never did. Present company excluded, he replied. Survive, Canthira, Haddon purred, and return to us when this is a world of peace. I feel you are in need of such a place. He pawed lightly at her face before drawing his other paw across his face. And then, too, Haddon was gone into darkness. Canthira had never had to fight back tears more than now. She thought of Ansh's final words to the rebellion. Get to it. So few final words for so many soon to die, and yet she doubted anyone had ever meant something more sincerely. With that, she limped off to the city limits. The battle was fully underway by the time she reached the surface. She'd had no choice but to do so, the actions of the first rebel wave, bombing of critical management sites, proving as impactful below as above. Dust had flown in torrents, and Canthira had risked burial alive in several moments while down there. The street in which she arose was thankfully deserted, but the noise of conflict so loud it felt this must be the only untouched street in the city. It would be touched soon enough. Plasma scoured the wall just above her head, and she was behind cover in an instant. She patted out patches of flame which peppered her cloak from unspent rubidium as the assault continued. Management's hydrogen supplies were clearly low. Interesting that they hadn't restocked given their awareness of the impending revolt. Canthira inventoried her support systems. The information on the heads-up display was less than encouraging. Her accelerated trip back down the spire, paired with the exertion of the night before, meant little by way of organic ammunition for the needle array in her back. A little subterfuge would be required to get off this street. Luckily for her, the chaos had begun before the denizens of this street had been able to make it to the market. Several sacks of fly ground, the insectoid base of most food on the planet, were stacked beside Canthira, against the ever-deteriorating wall which served as her cover. The barrages had developed a rhythm now as the attacking soldiers were forced to decompress their overworked weaponry. In the lull, she rose above the wall, armed with a sack in either hand. The troopers, spotting their now easy target, hurriedly snapped the release valves of their rifles closed and took aim. In the millisecond before they fired, Canthira whirled as if dancing, releasing a cartwheel of expanding powder into the air before her. She was a step away from the line of fire by the time it reached her, the bolts of superheated gas igniting the spiraling powder filling the street from paving to rooftop with a wall of fire. The troopers, shocked by the blast and with vision hampered by the auto-darkening effect of their masks, were ignorant to Canthira's egress from the street via an apartment window. As Canthira made her way down litter-strewn back alleys, the noise of the conflict was heard like construction work through a pillow. This only intensified her startled reaction to the intense buzz of the burster within the folds of her cloak. She'd presumed it lost after the fall and hadn't really thought to check since. Her surprise was made greater by the location. Whatever had been used to deliver this message, discovery was all but inevitable. The signal would be too strong to avoid some form of detection. She withdrew the device, speeding up her tired gait as she did so. The signal's discovery meant her discovery too, if she did not hurry. The splintered screen was hard to read as she ran, but the message was clear. It almost stopped her in her tracks. Comma. Incongruous to most, easily dismissed as an error, a mere catching of a button. Little did most know Overwatch devices required the user to select 6 distinct commands to generate the symbol, making error virtually impossible. And, even if the source could be located, and if capture of the recipient occurred, the meaning was of limited value should you be able to extract it. Don't contact. It was as simple as that. No guidance on where to go, no instruction as to what next, no further support. Whatever had been given, that's what you had. For the average captive, this would provide ample fuel for manipulation by their captors, as abandonment could quickly drive resentment and a willingness to betray. However, captors would generally neglect the direct meaning of the symbol itself, too busy searching for the hidden intricacies and potential for misdirection. A pause. To the recipient, it made a promise. Regardless of time, regardless of circumstance, regardless of how, without promise of success, but with earnest intent, we will come for you. Overwatch will come for you. By virtue of candidate selection, this had always been enough, even for the cases where when had been a century and how had been a long overdue death. They had never talked. While Canthira shared this sentiment, she did not intend to be captured. The burster bounced away into a seeping gutter as she continued at a pace through the twisting maze towards the city limits. She swept a digit down her combustion weapon as she ran. 7 shots left. 6 for whoever. 1 for her. No capture. Ever, she thought. The streets around her were now deathly quiet. Though far from the centre, she'd expected some form of carnage to still be within reach. As she came to the edge of a square, Canthira was reminded carnage wasn't always unending explosions and an eternal roar. Corpses lay face down in a line. Various species, all bound and broken. Only one remained upright, a crowd of management troops behind them. Evolution. Tentacles held together with the cruel and versatile restraints of a force required to police a multitude. They bobbed and weaved on the stems of their limbs, struggling in bondage. Canthira felt as if she recognized them, but was quick to dismiss the thought. Now was no time for emotions. Another path was needed. As she slunk back into the alley at a crouch, she could have sworn the evolution looked at her. No matter now. From the snap which echoed down the alley behind her, they wouldn't be telling anyone what they had seen. Countless more alleyways came and went without incident. The sound had increased once more, though, to something which could only be described as all-out war. Twice, Canthira had heard the boom of energy plants exploding. There would be little left of those neighbourhoods, she thought, hoping neither were anywhere near close to Daedra. The child, leaving her, was the worst in all of this, though with no guarantee of escape herself and no support for an indeterminate period. She would be in as much danger with Canthira as she was here. The best to hope for was that management took an early victory as sufficient punishment for the masses. Workforce replacements had been known to happen. On several planets, Canthira had solid intelligence that the replacements were greeted in orbit by the frozen remains of their forebears bouncing from the hulls of the transport ships. All of their forebears. Jolting herself free of borderline panic for the child, she realised there was only one block left before there was no choice but to return to the underground. She rounded the final corner, and an exasperated "of course" sputtered from her lips. Less than a couple of metres away stood 3 management soldiers, hulking in full breacher armour. She'd had her fill of fighting them the night before. Never mind, I won't have to fight them again, she thought, as the centre soldier heaved forward his already arming arc cannon. Even Canthira couldn't outpace lightning. As she made her peace with a less than peaceful life, Canthira was sprayed with the viscera of the soldiers as they erupted in sequence from left to right. Spitting filth from her mouth and wiping more from her eyes, she surveyed the abattoir that was the street. "Of course," she said, louder this time and with greater exasperation. No one had ever been so frustrated with being alive. The shorter was clicking twin vibrains into a resting state, having just used them to fatally disrupt the molecular structure of their own comrades. Behind them, the taller was repeatedly punching an unarmed and half-armoured fellow soldier who did not appear to be long for this world. When finished, the taller cast his victim aside before kicking open a grate to the sewer beneath. "They even know where I'm going next," Canthira lamented. Eerily synchronized, the soldiers stood aside, leaving her path to freedom clear. Of course, this was as much as Canthira could manage, and with that, she strode forward and dropped into the sewer below. The underpassages were now deafening to the tune of a dying city filtering through from above. But on the bright side for Canthira, she was far, far away from any further risk of collapse. Arriving to find her skiff concealed exactly as she had left it, she could only be amused to discover it had been fixed in her absence. The shorter and the taller were annoyingly good at whatever it is they were doing. Kicking the engine into life, Canthira departed the city for the last time. Here would be there forevermore. Riding the skiff out into the mountains, she was unsurprised by the absence of bounders this time. Granting no credit to her irritating saviours, it was of course down to the wealth of targets they already had within the city walls. The journey had almost become tedious upon arrival at her terminus in the deep red riverbed she had surveyed from above less than 3 days ago. As she exited the skiff and trekked upstream in the memory of the river, all she could think of was Ansh, Haddon, Daedra and her parents. Where they were now, whether they were safe, if she were wrong for following orders. Considering her final message from Overwatch, a part of her even considered turning around and heading back before she thought better of it. Ansh had been right. The plight of the universe did not end at Casturon's upper atmosphere, and there was far more good in moving on than selfishly remaining for the bonds she'd forged here. As the riverbed deepened where once it had drove hard into the ground, dust seemed to form a sparkling curtain in mid-air. As her feet picked up more and more, the veil became a more complex shape. To the knowing eye, a modified abyss cruiser, currently veiled. It was the perfect vessel for anyone who didn't desire company, within or without. The faithful friend of smugglers and spies everywhere. As the undercarriage released its entry ramp, the veil deactivated, revealing the exterior to be dusty, but otherwise unbothered by the extremes of the desert in which it had sat for months. Canthira looked skywards as she covered the remaining ground to her ship. As if on autopilot, her eyes immediately settled on Pontes. A pause, she thought. Yes, that feels like a place to pause. As the ramp resealed, Canthira slid into the pilot's chair. Her mind had already communicated the desired coordinates to the vessel, and the engines had begun their optimization routine to get her the distance. The rivers weren't going to be a viable route for this journey. Although much quicker, the nearest sinking pool was essentially Casturon property. This meant her engine would be required to put in some serious work to get to Pontes' system. The cruiser lifted into the air, and soon she was soaring over the multicoloured ranges of the not-so-high desert. Avoiding the city's airspace was sensible, but as the vessel arced away from the urban sprawl, she looked on for as long as she could at the smoking expanse. As the light of the setting sun flared in her side viewport, it almost looked like one of the orbital defence weapons in the city, firing on the central towers where management presided. Chance would be a fine thing, she thought sadly. The faces from the crowd she'd walked among earlier still fresh in her mind. The city now out of sight behind her. The whine of the engines pitched up, and the craft boomed out into the void. Free of the atmosphere, it was as if a little of the pull she felt for those on the surface had been held back by the gravity of Casturon. Canthira didn't like the feeling, but her course was set, and without doubt there would be work to do elsewhere. Still, such knowledge didn't stop her hand hesitating as she went to engage the FTL drive. She shook her head and hit the switch, Ansh's words in her mind as the drive engaged. So, get to it. And so she did.